Hi, friends. Welcome to the Full and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, and if you're here, it means you're ready for some aha moments that will inspire you to create a more vibrant, authentic life that's full of joyful moments, deeper connections, inner peace, and courageous action towards your dreams. Let's get started.
Hello, Priya. Thank you so much for being on the show. How are you today?
I'm really good and I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, it is such a pleasure. I feel like we are online buddies who have finally connected. I love all of your content online. I think you're such a pro and you are a creative genius with everything you do. So I am really honored to have you on the show and I can't wait to finally speak to you face to face.
Thank you. I mean, it'd be even better if we were actually in the room, wouldn't it? But it is so lovely to connect. So I can't wait to dive in and get started.
Oh my gosh. I wish you were right here too. I wish I could have just flown you out to America and we could be having a cute little lunch after this. That would be the best.
It would. That'd be so nice.
All right, Priya. So let's just dive right into it. Could you tell me a little bit about your personal and professional background?
Sure. I'm going to start with the professional because it's simpler. I am a dietitian. I graduated in 2005, so you can kind of tell how old I am from that. I've been around the block. I've seen lots of things in my life. And I kind of fell into eating disorders by accident. It wasn't what I set out to do, but it was where there were jobs. And I thought, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And I have not looked back since. So I worked in the NHS, which is in the National Health Service in the UK, in an eating disorder unit. I've worked in private hospitals, and I now work 100% in private practice, working one-to-one with people. And then I also run a 12-week online recovery course where I do group support. And yeah, that's really fun, actually. I'm really loving that work. And then because I get bored easily, I also work with the media. So I work with a television and with a radio, and I'm quite well known over here in the UK because I was the dietitian on a television show called Eat Well for Less on the BBC, where I had the privilege of not only cooking and sharing recipes, but also sharing anti-diet information and, just really being able to get those great nutrition messages out to the masses, which was just a joy and a privilege and something, that really I loved doing. And I now work with brands as well. So you might see me popping up on Instagram, doing a bit of brand work now and again. And then I also run a Pilates studio. That's like my de-stress place. When I go out to my studio and I get to chill. And I always say Pilates is not just lying on the floor and breathing, but there is some of that in there, which is great. And then personally, I have 3 birth children and I got remarried just over a year ago now. And I have 3 stepchildren. And I'm like the little old woman that lived in a shoe. I have 6 children who all live with me. It's nuts. Dinner time is very hectic, but also just so much fun. I love being surrounded by the children.
You or your husband, whoever does the cooking, must be really good at cooking in bulk.
We've got very used to it very quickly. He's actually amazing because I will just tell him what to do and he's like my sous chef. And he doesn't argue over it or kind of go, stop telling me what to do. He just jumps straight in there. It's incredible. So we make a very good team.
That's wonderful. That sounds so nice. I love a man who gets in the kitchen and can cook. That's so nice. Okay, so you have so much going on. I'm truly impressed with your personal life and your professional life and just, casually running a Pilates studio on the side. And, I just think it's amazing. And I really wanted to do this episode with you specifically on the 6 reasons why you shouldn't diet. So let's go for it. Let's just go right into number 1. What is the number 1 reason why someone shouldn't diet?
So I'm going to go for the impact on your mental health. I think that dieting can have such a significant impact on someone's mental health. And diet is such a really complex relationship that is going to vary from person to person. But we think about the impact on mental health. with dieting, if you drastically cut calories or you restrict certain foods, it's going to impact your mood. You can have mood swings, irritability, fluctuations in your blood sugars because you're skipping meals. You can get the impact of hunger. So I'm sure we can all associate with having felt hangry in the past. I certainly get like that, even if I skip lunch sometimes and I've been too busy perhaps. And then the kids come in and there's like snarky mummy in the background. And then we get the psychological stress of feeling deprived. And if you are depriving yourself of certain foods, it can really affect your sense of mood and your sense of well-being. You can end up feeling really awful when other people are eating the foods that you've restricted, or actually feeling really awful with the fact that you're not allowed to eat them and almost forget the reason why you're doing that. So one of my mantras is all foods are good foods. There is nothing that should be off limits. We don't need to have these restrictions. And if we go a little bit further into it and the impact from mental health, we've got things like increased anxiety and stress. So we know that dieting and yo-yo dieting, where we go round and round the cycle, can definitely heighten anxiety and stress. We've got the constant worry about what to eat, how many calories, have I stuck to the plan, what's the next food rule, counting points, whatever it might be. And it could just take up so much headspace. So I think that would be my number one, is that impact on mental health.
I completely align with that. I remember being stuck in my eating disorder, and even before that, just chronic dieting. My mood completely depended on how, quote, good I was at my diet that day or the number on the scale. I hated how something outside of me was telling me how good my day should be, right? And the moods were just up and down. And even my personality, I look back and cringe on some of the things I said to people when I was in that really hungry place or in that place of comparison. I feel like the body comparisons definitely impacted my mood as well. And then my brain was focused on food 95% of the time. Yeah. So it was just like such a terrible mental place to live. And being able to break free from that is seriously the greatest gift, because we're not supposed to over-focus on food. It's supposed to be something that brings us joy, something that brings us nourishment. And then we can move on with our day and focus on actual things that mean a lot more than the calories that you ate in that day or whatever. So I appreciate number one. What about number two?
Number two, I would say, is external validation. What I mean by that is external validation is when we feel that need to have approval, recognition, or affirmation from somebody other than ourselves. It's something external. And that could be an in-person compliment on your appearance. It could be a social media like or comment. It could be praise for your achievements. And I think on the one hand, most of us know that external validation shouldn't be the most important thing in life, but our culture almost has made it that way. It's a really hard thing. And with dieting, we have this extra focus on it because the pursuit of external validation can really feed into that and have several effects. So we can have this heightened focus on our appearance. And then when we get a compliment on dieting, it's like, oh, wow, how have you managed to do that? You look incredible. Are you on a new diet? Because it's really working for you. But instantly you get that kind of validation and it drives you to go, oh, well, what I'm doing is working. This is great. Look at the compliments I'm getting. I need to keep going to get more compliments.
Yes.
And this drive, this dependency on dieting and on changing our body shape in order to get that feedback, instead of being confident in who we are actually meant to be and in what our bodies are, instead of trying to conform to society standards.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that dieting really makes us dependent on looking outside of ourselves to make sure that we are okay in the world, right? So, okay, I got this many compliments. This number on the scale is here. I must be okay. I must be safe. When really we want to be finding that security inside of ourselves based on our traits and our characteristics, not something outside of ourselves, right? We're putting so much worth on what other people are saying. And I find dieting just drives that. It drives that to a place where you get so extreme. You're actually putting all of these external things before your health and happiness, which is just, it's an uncomfortable place to be. So, oh man. Okay. We have external validation number 2. What about number 3?
I am going to throw in there the effect of dieting on weight stigma. Weight stigma, I think, is something that wasn't really talked about until recently. And now it really is getting talked about, which is brilliant because we need this bigger awareness of how people can be discriminated against and stereotyped because of their weight, and how dieting can then perpetuate this. So it can reinforce these harmful stereotypes. So we know that in some healthcare settings, weight stigma can lead to biased treatment, which just is not right. And dieting and weight loss can be recommended without considering someone's actual needs or the potential psychological impact. And I think we've got this almost two-way cycle of sometimes diets are being recommended and we're being told to go on diets, but then also the impact of people going on diets is reinforcing this stereotype of we all need to lose weight, we all need to look a certain way, and reinforcing this thin ideal, this desire to achieve a thinner body in order to fit in, to look good, to be good, and to be healthy.
I find there are so many people who listen to this podcast who care about the well-being of others and their impact on the world. And I feel like this piece is important to question. Like if you're participating actively in diet culture and you're working to change your body and reach that thin ideal, you are a part of a really oppressive, harmful system, right? You're actively participating in something that harms people in larger bodies who aren't fitting into this norm. But if you are actively participating in this, how does it make your friends in larger bodies feel? Or how does it make people, living in, quote, the body you're trying to run away from? How does that person feel? Right. And so I always want people to think about, what are you perpetuating when you are posting those body photos online and those before and after photos? How does it make the people around you feel? And I know that's like a hard question to ask, and it's hard to admit that you might be part of the issue, but that's something I always have been so conscientious of once I started doing this work.
And I think it's also good to just say that most people have been there at some point.
Yeah, I was there too. Yeah,
absolutely. I definitely was. So it's really great to do this work and encourage people to challenge it, but without it being in a judgmental way, because we've been there before. There is another route that we can go.
Right. Absolutely. So true. Okay, so let's go into number 4.
So number 4 for me is how dieting can drive this disconnection from our hunger cues. And this all comes from intuitive eating. So disconnecting from our hunger cues or from our internal cues, I think is the way that I would say it, means losing touch with the natural signals and signs that our body sends us to indicate not only hunger and fullness, but satisfaction in food. Perhaps it's also when we need to move, when we need to take a break, all of those signs that the body gives us. And this disconnect can happen for so many reasons, but most of them are tied to dieting or restrictive eating or emotional eating. So they're quite often tied in with food, but not always. So I'll talk you through some of the ways this disconnection can work. So firstly, it could be that you have been ignoring your hunger cues. Now, we all do this sometimes, but if you do it consistently over time, if you're ignoring or overriding your hunger signals, then it can deaden or dull your ability to recognize them. So maybe your body stops sending out clear signals because it's realizing, oh, hello, she's not listening. There's not much point. I'm wasting my time here. Or it could be that you've been on a restrictive diet and calorie counting. And so once you've got to that point of, no, I've had all my calories for the day, that's it, I can't eat, you're ignoring that hunger. I can't listen to this right now. It could also be that you've been repeatedly losing and gaining weight, and that's confused your body's hunger and fullness signals, which, by the way, is reversible. So none of these things that I'm saying mean you are broken. Yeah, we have ways of getting these signals working again and you getting back in touch with them. And then we've also got misinterpreting signals. I certainly know I sometimes do this, and I have to check in with myself and go, right, what is it you're feeling right now, Priya? In fact, this only happened to me the other day. I remember I was standing in the kitchen. I was thinking, I think I'm hungry, but it's not quite hunger. And I worked out it was I hadn't had any water all morning. I'd only drunk tea. And it just took me a little while to go, work it through, Priya. Water, right. That's what I need. And I've been so busy, we can get caught up with things and then neglect to listen into those signals. So there's a little story from my life. But we could also be misinterpreting those signals with things like anxiety, with big emotions, with boredom, with tiredness, or with thirst, as I just gave you the example for. Mm-hmm. And so it's also key to start tuning into what is the signal and what does hunger feel like. And then my third example would be hormonal changes. So if you are dysregulated with your eating patterns, it can sometimes affect your hormone production. For example, you might lose your period, and that's going to be impacting your fertility hormones, but also other hormones. So therefore, it can affect things like ghrelin, which signal hunger, and leptin, which signal fullness. So there's just some examples.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I just got to say, dieting sets you up for a very disorienting relationship with your body, right? Like you start to lose these signals. You don't really know when you're hungry, when you're full. And that's where breaking free from dieting can really get you on the path to reconnecting with your body. You have to relearn the body and start to trust the body. And that's one thing that's part of this is you actually lose that sense of body trust, right? And self-trust, because you don't trust yourself to check in and do the thing it says. You don't trust yourself to listen to the body. So there's so much that's destroyed in that relationship between you and your body, which is honestly, I think that connection between your body and you and your ability to honor it is one of the most valuable things you can have in this life. And it can be destroyed just by dieting for a brief period of time. So, all right, that is a good one for number 4. What is number 5?
So number 5, I'm a dietitian, so I'm going to say nutritional deficiencies.
It had to happen.
It had to come in at some point. If you're not eating enough to meet your nutritional needs or to meet all of your nutritional needs, it's a potential that you're going to end up deficient in some nutrients. Perhaps you cut out a major food group, such as dairy, for example. Perhaps you've chosen to go over for plant-based milks and plant-based yogurts, etc., or you've cut them out entirely and you're not replacing at all. It could therefore mean that you end up lacking on calcium. As an example, I sometimes find that people end up lacking on iron because they, again, have moved towards a more plant-based form of eating because they think that this is a good thing to do or because it's less calories. There's these subtle ways of actually dieting without dieting, but it still is dieting perhaps. And they've cut out the meat. They've cut out the fish, perhaps, then they've gone and they've cut out egg, and you can get more and more and more restrictive along this journey and then end up lacking vital things such as iron, which is going to lead to symptoms such as, a lack of energy, tiredness, just feeling washed out all of the time. It's no fun. And then another really big one that I come across, I would say on a daily basis, is cutting out fat.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I remember this from my childhood. So I am an 80s child. Back in the 80s, everybody was on diets, but it was all low fat. And we've gone, haven't we? We've gone like almost full circle. We've gone from low fat to low carb to high protein. We could just go through, we cycle through the food groups. Back in that time, I very much remember it was the low fat era. Everybody was on low fat cottage cheese and skimmed milk. And when you're cutting out an essential food group such as fat, then you could end up with a deficiency in essential fatty acid, which is going to affect the quality of your skin, your hair, your nails, your wound healing, your brain cognition, and your mood as well. So we have these global impacts where when you're cutting out big chunks of your diet, you're potentially going to have an impact at some point.
Yes. Wow. It's so funny you bring this up. I love watching survival shows. I don't know if you've ever watched a survival show before, but after like a week or two out in it's really like primitive living survival stuff. After several weeks, all the contestants can focus on is how do I get fat in my body? Like most of us aren't living. Fat is like the primary need for survival, which in my mind, I was like, it's so crazy because there's so many people who actively avoid this and it's so prized out in a place where diet culture doesn't exist.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Well, okay. So nutritional deficiencies, nobody wants that, right? If you are truly aligned with health, which you're dieting because there's a part of you that is convinced it's a healthier thing to do. If you are aligned with health, we really need to check in on this number 5 and be like, where are you nutritionally deficient? And recognize that the variety is really supportive of health.
Variety is definitely where it's at. And we think about all of the diet and filler foods that are out there on the market. Quite often, they are not as nutritious, but also they're not as tasty.
Oh, gosh. Don't even get me started. I'm so glad I'm not eating those foods anymore. They did not bring joy, really, into my life. The tastier the food, the better. That is where I'm at with food right now. I love the most flavorful meal you can find. That's what I want. All right. So what is number 6? Our final reason why someone shouldn't diet.
Last but not least, because this is just as important as all the others, for me, it would be that focus on rules. So when you are in the depths of diet after diet, there are different rules perhaps on each diet, but there's still rules. And sometimes the rules can stack up. So whilst you might have gone from one diet to the next, you're still keeping hold of the first diet's rules at the same time. These could be rules such as sticking to a set number of calories or eating at certain times or only eating certain foods in certain ways or having to lose a certain amount of weight each week. They're really going to impact your quality of life. Not only can they impact your nutritional status, your mood and your health, but also your ability to eat with others, to eat socially and to enjoy food. If you've got a rule of I can't eat after 6 o'clock, how are you going to go out for dinner? Maybe you go to someone's house and have that dinner party and enjoy that food. So I think that is a really, really important one. And I love working with people. In fact, just before coming on to talk to you, I was recording something on food rules for my course, working on how to notice those food rules. And then once you've noticed them, think, is there truth in this? Is this something I need to be living my life by? And if not, perhaps where has it come from? And is it time to start breaking this? And if so, how am I going to do it? Let's be strategic. Let's plan it in. And you're going to have to break a food rule time and time again before you get that rewiring of that thought pattern in your head. But it will come with practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The food rules are also that major cause of guilt, right? Because if you're breaking them, you live with this guilt. They also cause obsessive overthinking, right? That's what I see my people get stuck in all the time, is this whirlwind of almost rumination of all of the rules they've broken and the guilt. And so that repetition that you were saying, so important, because you have to have the evidence that you can survive that breaking of the rule. And the more you challenge yourself, the easier it does get. And then that one point that you brought up that you ask where it comes from. I love asking this question because usually it's the most random place. Like it's usually like, oh, when I was 10 years old, I saw an episode of Dr. Phil and he said this one line and I've been living by it ever since. And you're like, oh, wow, can you believe that? Like, it's so wild how we can cling on to our rules from like a really arbitrary moment or memory in our life that had an impact on how we felt, and then forever navigate from that place. So I want everyone here to really question, where did your food rules come from? What memories attached to that? And do you really need that anymore? How is that impacting your quality of life? And like you said, like it can drastically impact your quality of life socially or emotionally. There's so much there. So anyway, Priya, this has been so eye-opening. I really appreciate you walking us through the 6 reasons why a person shouldn't diet. And Before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you if you have any words of wisdom for people who are stuck in dieting, how they might be able to begin to let this go.
Well, I wish I was a wise person. I don't feel like I am. I would start by really thinking about your core values. So who is it that you're setting out to be? What are the things that are truly important to you? And I'm always love doing this work with people. I've just done this with my group, and they were able to notice that actually their body shape and size was not what ultimately was important. What was important, things like being a kind person, being there to support their friends and family, being seen as a good friend. You know, those were the things that actually they wanted somebody to remember them for, rather than being a certain size. And what one person said to me, so very sadly, two of the people in the group coaching course that I'm running at the minute had been to a funeral in the same week. Not the same funeral, but they've both been to a funeral. And their reflection on that was, nobody commented on that person's shape or size. That is not what they are being remembered for. And I think that's a really key thing. You know, when we get to the end of our journey in life, nobody's going to remember your shape and size. They're going to remember that you were compassionate, that you were generous, that you took the time to be with them, that you were there for them when they were really sad and needed you most. So I think that would be one of my starting points, is actually, who are you, or who do you want to be remembered for as a person? And does your dieting and eating align with that, or does it take you away from that?
I would say you're pretty wise. I like that piece of advice.
Well, some of the teenagers would agree.
Maybe one day they will. But I completely agree with that. Checking in with yourself and your values is a great place to start. So Priya, again, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you if they want to access your work?
Oh, it's been such a joy. Thank you. So you can find me by hopping over onto Instagram. And if you look me up, I'm at Priya_Tew. Very strange surname. That's TEW. And you can hop over to my website, which is www.dietitianuk.co.uk. Or if you get really stuck, look up priyatew.com and I come up there as well. So I can be found all over the place.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
All right, that concludes this week's episode of the Full and Thriving podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. When you have a moment, please head on over to Instagram and follow my recovery coaching account at Meg_McCabe to stay up to date on everything I'm doing in recovery land. And if you're feeling extra inspired, please send me a direct message to let me know how this podcast has impacted your life. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.